City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping, which has been truncated, which is good. I just want to remind the gallery that the council meetings local law requires that any members of the gallery here tonight must not interject or take part in councillor debate. Any person who is called to order may be requested to leave the chamber, and notwithstanding this, the Mayor may invite members of the gallery to speak for up to 3 minutes on a report listed in the agenda tonight. There is also time allotted for tonight's agenda for public question time. If you do wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available with Mr Chick outside at the table, outside the chambers, and hand it to Mr Chick. Now, I do encourage you to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. Please also note that all council meetings are now being live streamed to allow the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time. In accordance with the council's local law, this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is given by myself as acting mayor. And in the unlikely event of some kind of emergency where we need to evacuate, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden, who is Rebecca over there. So let's start with some apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies tonight? Councillor Baxter?
We have a few apologies, actually. So we have apologies from Councillor Gross, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic and Councillor Bond.
Yep. So would you like to move a motion to accept and grant leave for their leave of absence? Who would like to second it? Councillor Brand. I'll put that to the vote. Oh, that's passed unanimously. So, councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the council held on the 3rd of July 2019 have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding these minutes? Are you happy to move it? Councillor Pearl will move the minutes. Is there a seconder for that motion? There's only 4 of you. Councillor Brand, you must need to second it. So I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. So this is the point where we declare any conflicts of interest. Does anyone actually have a conflict of interest in any of the matters arising tonight? No? Now, councillors, we do have 4 petitions with us tonight. So we will start with item 4.1, which is the petition regarding watering systems for Smith and Pages Reserve. Now, I don't have anyone listed to speak to that. Is that correct? Or does someone need to fill out a form? No? Drew, did you want to speak? Mr Fitzgerald, do we need to fill out a form prior or can we do it afterwards?
I think it should be done prior, but you could potentially move to 4.2 and they can fill the form in.
Well, shall we move to 4.2? And Mr Fitzgerald, would you mind filling out a form so then you can speak to item 4.1, please? All right, so instead, councillors, we'll move to item 4.2, which is the petition regarding a child-safe gate to Elwood Community House Reserve. Now, we have one person who is asked to speak from the public, Chris Moyle. Is Chris Moyle here? We're doing well. All right, well, given that Chris Moyle is not here, I guess I'm putting this to councillors. Have you got any questions for the officers in regard to this petition? Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I note the officer's recommendation. Actually, sorry, it's the wrong question.
It's the wrong one,
Yep.
so you take that back.
Mr. Moyle is here. Perhaps he could speak first.
Oh, is Mr Moyle here? This is Mr Moyle. You wanted to speak to the petition to the Elwood Safe. Would you like to take a seat, sir, and say your name and suburb? And if I could ask you to keep your questions or comments to 3 minutes, please.
Oh, fine, thank you. Chris Moyle, Elwood is the suburb. Do you need this street address or anything? No, okay, thank you. I Apologies for my tardiness and time. I'm busy. I do have a real concern about this this gate and the whole. Firstly, I guess three issues. The way it's been executed, it's not a process that I've ever seen before, and that's point one. And I would like to see what does come out of that process and how that process is executed in more detail. Secondly, no petition has ever been run through the street. Elwood, Knight Street in particular, I live in number 3, obviously giving away my address now, but number 3, it's a small street with 8 properties, and some of those are combined properties. There's been break-ins, and I've witnessed those and reported those to the police and been a part of the process of apprehending those individuals. Is point one, when that property number 1 was being built. Number 2 is there's been drug issues with people sleeping in the park, and none of this has been taken further within the council itself, and it's been reported. And number 3 is the parking in the street. I feel that the $30,000 could be greatly attributed. Several years ago I approached the council about works in the street. The street has got broken pavers, it's got poor lighting, it's got no signage, we've got parking issues, and only as late as 4 weeks ago I backed into a car parked illegally in the street, and I've had to pay $1,500 to have that repaired. So the simple issue is we are in a very small street, we have very poor parking and facilities. The street needs upgrading, including the road, and the administering of gas and other assets need to be updated. The gas itself hasn't been replaced since 1952. So I guess the biggest issue is I think that the street is not in a state to allow such egress and entry in that walkway without far greater consultation and without the street's proper petition, and nobody has physically petitioned the individuals in that street.
Thank you, Mr. Moyle. Councillor Pearl?
Give me a bit more background about your specific objection to the gate itself. What impact will the gate have on the area and yourself?
Parking, pedestrian access. The parking in the street's no good. Why don't they continue using the actual existing gate? If I had a child, and I've had them before, got 2 boys, the actual entry into that area right now is protected in all angles, so children having parties, access egress into the street is completely blocked. Now I've got a secondary avenue for people to move in and out of that second access. So it's not ideal.
Thanks, Mr. Moyle. You can return to your seat. Councillors, do we have any questions for the officers then? I will take up Mr. Moyle's sort of concerns. Can I ask then, have we identified where the petition has come from? Is it not from anyone on Knight Street? I guess there's one part to the question, and 2, I'm not aware of the condition of that street. Is it something that we need to consider before even contemplating a gateway? Mr. Trail.
Through you, Acting Mayor. What's before us tonight is the petition around installing a gate. I highlight the recommendation before you tonight is that we include the installation of a gate as part of the design process, which will be undertaken next year. That will include community engagement. So the resolution recommendation is not to install a gate straight away, just for clarity. We can be clear around that consultation. I can engage with the Speaker tonight regarding that clarity. We did receive a petition from largely people that use the park and use the community centre. We also heard at a public meeting people from Knight Street and surrounding areas not having a similar view. We've gone through in detail our assessment based around that and highlighted our officer views on that topic, which is a mixed view. But in terms of recommendation to close out the petition, it is to recommend installing a gate and consult the wider community when we do the design of that park next financial year.
Councillor Voss?
Just wanted to ask a question to Mr Trail, because item number 1 in the officer's recommendation does read as though it will be installed when the reserve design is undertaken. So should that be reworded?
Right. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we would recommend that we slightly change that so that the intent is clear. So I would recommend changing that to consult on the installation of a new gate with associated laneway upgrade into the Knight Street end of the Elwood Community House Reserve when the consultation to upgrade the play space reserve and park is undertaken. So then it's clear that broader consultation on whether to install it or not would occur as part of that process.
Further question, Councillor Voss?
Just further clarify, so that would be remove includes and change it to consult on the. That be correct? Thank you.
Councillor Baxter?
Just another clarifier, and that you'd also be changing the word design to consultation further down the sentence.
So do we have any further questions on this, or everyone's happy for the moment? So we have a slightly altered officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Councillor Voss to move. Who would? Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Voss, would you like to speak to this?
No.
No?
Reserve my right.
Councillor Brand.
Having visited the toy library there and seen the situation, it seems like quite a reasonable idea to install a gate so that there's public access through the thing, but I can understand there'd also be downsides to that, and I'm not quite sure what this petition is actually trying to do, except make it registered, to register with us that there are people who would very much like to see a gate there, because we'll certainly be looking at it when we design the area, and we'll be looking at the pros and cons, and everybody, of course, in that process will have a full chance to be consulted and to put their opinion in and put their arguments forward. And I would imagine that even once that's done, there'll be some other formal opportunity to lodge objections or support for it as well. So there's plenty of consultation to go on down the track, and lots of research that council will do, lots of design investigation about what's the best thing, how things would work, what the pros and the cons are. So this is just the beginning of that, if it hasn't already begun.
Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor, Acting Mayor, whichever one that is. So I wanted to thank the original petitioners as well as the other people from Knight Street who have come to speak at this meeting and at the meeting where we received the petition, and noting that, this is about including this into our consultation, and that, we're not going to be whacking in a gate just yet. We're going to be consulting with people and deciding what the best thing is. I note some of the concerns that have been mentioned by some of the people that have come to the previous meeting and also to this meeting about what would happen if a gate went in, and I think that some of those things can be solved outside of this process. I mean, certainly things about the pavers and things like that, we should be looking at that sort of stuff, whether a gate goes in or not. I think that that's relatively important and core business for us. Other issues such as antisocial behaviour and stuff, we should be working with the police on that sort of stuff as always, and again, regardless of whether a gate goes in or not, we need to be working on those sorts of things. So I think that we'll go through consultation, but I don't think any decision either way is going to have a massive impact on some of those issues outside of what we already do. We need to be doing those anyway.
Anyone else would like to speak? Councillor Voss, would you like to close? No. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. All right, we will return then to the petition 4.1, which is regarding the watering systems for Smith and Page reserves. So, councillors, we do have a member of the public wishing to speak. So, Jeremiah Drew Fitzgerald, would you like to take the seat and state your name and suburb and then share your thoughts?
My name is Jeremiah Drew Fitzgerald. I live at 135A Stoke Street, Port Melbourne. And first off, we'd like to thank the council for the prompt action on the park. Very, very pleased. And very happy signatures too. We have another request, if that's possible. With the upgrade of the Remembrance Park, could there be a water bowl put in for the dogs and the humans? Upgrade, yeah. Could that be possible?
One of the councillors may take up your request in just a moment when we go to that part. So that's the other request. Anything else that you would like to mention?
Yes, and some of the ladies have also voiced their concern on the lighting area around Northport Station. It's very dark.
Thank you, Mr Fitzgerald.
Thank you.
Would any councillors like to take up Mr Fitzgerald's questions or to... yes?
Can we put a dog bowl where it was suggested?
Yes, so who could respond to that question? Who would... Mr Trail, is that you again?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I'd like to do an assessment of the acting dog bowl to see if we can do that. We do have a parks furniture program, which is to look at installing and upgrading assets in our parks that are not up to standard, so I can take that on notice and investigate that request.
Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Mr Trail. It wasn't just for a dog bowl, but also a drinking fountain.
Yes.
And as part of the Remembrance Garden reinstatement and upgrade. Also, the lighting there. So the other side of the railway line has been upgraded with lighting along the 109 trail. This side, where the irrigation has been going in, is very dark, and in particular around Northport tram stop. There's a couple of factors. One, there's not very many lights there, but the second one is the trees have grown over the solar panel that is used to light up that one light that's going down the path towards Raglan Street, and if that could be sort of looked at where they're placed, so maybe it could be placed, changed its direction so it actually doesn't fall in the shade. I think they were the questions that could be looked at or taken on notice for response, please, or responded to now.
Through you, Acting Mayor, we'll look into the tree issue over the solar panels as a customer request tomorrow. In regards to lighting, that requires some investigation. We do have a lighting program, but with other priorities in the municipality at the moment, but where this could be considered in that program, it could be a piece of work undertaken.
Do any other councillors have any questions for officers? Councillor Voss.
In reviewing this report, in relation to the petition, it does talk about the trees being in poor health, and we've heard previously from the petitioners, Mr Fitzgerald and Mr Willis, that they haven't ever seen the trees being watered, in particular in Page Reserve. What evidence do we have of a contractor watering those new trees for the 2 years that they're supposed to?
Through you, Acting Mayor, in terms of the 2-year maintenance periods of new trees that we install, we do audit our contract performance on a monthly occurrence. That's regarding all parks programs. Investigating the compliance for the 2-year maintenance period to be undertaken as part of that process. As we've highlighted in the report, the soil conditions is seen as the predominant reason for poor health at this particular stretch of our municipality, and we are looking at other initiatives, mainly with improving the soil conditions as a better chance of tree health success in that region.
Councillor Voss.
Page reserve, there's only a small bit of the extension along that area. In your recommendation, you said that there are no immediate plans within the next 2 years to irrigate it. Wouldn't it be a simple extension to irrigate that? I would have thought it would have been a simple extension to irrigate that part of the reserve, given all the rest of it's now irrigated. What's the barriers to extending the irrigation there?
Through you, Acting Mayor, we're trying to be very conscious with our irrigation usage of potable water. We're trying to service the majority of the municipality. We believe we've updated a few stretches along that ground. We look at usage and trends as a bit of a guide on how we program our irrigation. Internally, we're looking to get some better irrigation strategy to connect in with potential water harvesting programs, how we achieve some of our sustainability initiatives, but also maintain our parks in a healthy manner for all types of usage to be used. So whilst we're undertaking that work, we're trying to keep particular areas and sort of spread the irrigation and water usage across municipality where usage is most done. We've updated Turner Reserve just down the road. We've updated this area, and we think that that's serviceable at the moment, and there's other areas of our municipality that we would like to focus on in the immediate term.
Councillor Voss.
Just one more question from me around irrigation. How and when are the priorities for the location of those areas being irrigated going to be resolved?
Through your Acting Mayor, we're looking to do a piece of work over this financial year that looks at connecting a lot of our work around water use in public space. So that will be connecting up our water harvesting programs, having conversations about quality expectations. We'll get community feedback from our upcoming public space strategy that may help us guide on that. We've got increasing utilities bills that we're trying to manage prudently. So through that process, we'll try and have appropriate conversations with our community and the councillors about what the appropriate water usage level is and what our strategies are to reduce potable water, but also achieve appropriate watering for our grass cover.
Are there any other councillors with questions? Can I have a mover for... Oh, Mr Fitzgerald, you can take your seat back in the gallery. Thank you. Can I have a mover for this petition recommendation? Councillor Baxter, Councillor Pearl to second. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Baxter? Councillor Pearl. Anyone else to speak to the item? Councillor Voss.
I'd like to suggest an amendment. And that amendment would be at number 2, rather than notes that there are no immediate plans, to suggest an amendment that plans be updated to irrigate Page Reserve within the next 2 years. Hang on. That... what's a better word?
Clarifying question.
Clarifying question.
So just Councillor Voss, are you intending that the wording of that would indicate that we're now committing to do those works?
Yes, within the next 2 years.
Without costings, etc. So, yeah, okay. Thanks for clarifying
that. So is that wording correct, Councillor Voss? Do I need to check with the amendment with them, or is it too substantial? Is it I'm just going to get some advice.
Through you, Acting Mayor, Councillor Voss, are you going to make a resource commitment tonight, or are you asking the administration to come back with a plan and costing to do that?
I was intending that within the next 2 years that irrigation would occur in Page Reserve.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarifying question? But what if it is not a prior, like on the list, if we do a study and it's not the highest priority, Are we committing that above other parks that may need?
Yes.
For the...
I think that's clear.
Do you have a seconder for that motion? Amendment, sorry. So there is no seconder, so that amendment will lapse. All right, we're back to the original. So, Councillor Baxter, you didn't want to speak, neither did you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Voss or Councillor Brown, did you want to speak to this, or shall I just put it to vote? Councillor Voss.
No, I'd like to speak to it, and I'd like to thank the officers very much for the work that they've done on that whole section. It's actually looking fantastic. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Drew Fitzgerald and also Mr. Gary Willis for the work that they've done in putting this petition together and garnering support. I do think the part over Ingle Street is a small extension and quite a simple one, but I do understand the council's problem with all of our municipality needing irrigation. However, that was just a small part, and I do worry that it's in Montague and there's not very much green space in Montague and in particular there. So that was why I thought that amendment might be an interesting debate, but nonetheless we weren't to have that debate tonight. But I'm very pleased to see this, and I am also very keen to see how our priorities for the irrigation list are resolved going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Brand.
Yes, look, I think it's right that we've reverted to the original officer's recommendation, but it does seem to me to be definitely a worthwhile, interesting thing that we should be considering. And I'd be very, very happy to be a part of considering. It seems sort of a sensible thing to do, but we're just not going to make a decision on the submission of on the occasion of the submission of a petition to actually commit ourselves to doing that right now. We'll just need a little bit more consideration first.
Councillor Baxter, would you like to close?
Yeah, just briefly. I'm happy to look at this sort of stuff, but that sort of took me a bit by surprise, and thought let's look at it going forward and see how we go. I'm very worried about how we're going to be able to irrigate all of our open spaces, but definitely understand where Councillor Voss is coming from.
So I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Can I just check something? Are the microphones up loud enough for the people in the gallery? No, they're not. Are we able to increase the volume on it? Just because it does seem very quiet, so we would rather... Is that much better? Great. I'm a microphone hearing people fiend. All right, we're going to move to item 4.3, which is the petition regarding the lighting at Lagoon Oval Reserve in Port Melbourne. And we have had one person wanting to speak to this. It's Michael Strong. Mr. Strong, if you could please take your seat, make sure the button is on, and state your name and suburb, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Michael Strong, and I live in the Park Apartments in Port Melbourne, overlooking the Lagoon Reserve. And I want to begin by thanking the Council for its efforts in improving amenities on the reserve. And I also want to thank the Council officers for their prompt and courteous responses to correspondence and messages I have left in relation to this matter. I've been very impressed. Clearly, there's a high level of demand for appropriate lighting on the reserve for what's called passive recreation and for safety as well as for sporting activity. The question is how to achieve an optimal lighting outcome. We are assured the current arrangement is a trial and that plans will be drawn up in this financial year for a permanent solution. The two floodlights on the pavilion, which are the problem from our perspective, were presumably installed for sporting activity for a few hours, a couple of nights each week. No problem at all. I'm sure it was never intended that those floodlights be switched on from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. every night. For us in the Park Apartments, it's a bit like having a truck with its headlights on high beam glaring into your lounge room. The Council has angled the lights down to try to reduce the glare. Thank you for that. But I suspect this really isn't working for anyone. It has significantly reduced the area lit for sports training and for passive recreation. Also, any reduction in glare from the lights has been replaced by glare off the roof of the pavilion. As older residents, my wife who's with me tonight and I, one of our forms of passive recreation is enjoying the sunset and the dusk and the beauty of Port Melbourne by night from our apartment. This is part of our enjoyment of Port Melbourne. We don't want to have to draw our blinds at 5 o'clock every night, 7 days a week because of the glare. The permanent solution, and I accept that the Council is working towards a permanent solution, might involve using the pavilion lights only for sport, as I'm sure they were originally intended. And they could, in those circumstances, be tilted back to their original angle so that the reserve can be properly lit during sports activity. For passive recreation, the reserve should, I submit, be lit from the south, not from the north, not with lights, strong lights facing the park apartments, but from the south. This would light the important footpath that runs between Leodette Street and Graham Street, thereby enhancing the safety of that access. Appropriate lighting would spill out onto the grassed area to facilitate dog walking and associated social activity. There would be no glare for affecting residents in the surrounding streets. The lighting could be left on until much later than 9 p.m. I mean, from the legal world. Violent criminals, let me tell you, are much more active after 9 p.m. than they are before. So that's all I really wanted to say. I'm not sure why 9 p.m. has been chosen as the switch-off time. We rarely sight anyone on the reserve after 8 p.m. or even 7:30 p.m, although I certainly accept and welcome their presence on the reserve at earlier times. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pearl would like to ask a question, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. I don't think we've got this right. I've spent a lot of my last month working with people in your apartment block and people exercising their dogs there. It's clear to say we don't have this right. What would be a tolerable... This is a temporary thing, we hope, in terms of what's trying to get this balance right between floodlighting your apartment and also providing an increased amount of recreation during the winter months. So what would be a workable compromise for you over the next couple of months in terms of the use of those lights, assuming they're going to be on for more than one night a week?
Well, if they could be turned off a little earlier, that would help. But I accept until that there's a permanent solution, it's hard to switch them off and give those who clearly want the reserve lit any satisfaction. My concern is that temporary can mean this much or it can mean this much. Temporary means not permanent.
That's correct.
And could it be this much, please, not that much, for an ultimate solution? That's really all my wife and I request.
Thanks for that, and thanks for coming this evening. We appreciate it.
You can return to the gallery. So, councillors, do we have some questions of officers? Is it Mr. Trail again, Councillor Pearl, and then Councillor Voss?
When will we turn the lights off? So, at what month, what date will we not have the lights on at night time?
Through your acting mayor, the trial of having these lights on to 9 p.m. was to mimic daylight savings hours, sort of to try and have some sort of consistency. So we're looking to trial this all the way through to that October change.
Sorry, I just couldn't hear you.
Yep. And then I'll repeat the answer. So through your acting mayor, the theory around having a 9 p.m. deadline was to sort of mimic what sort of daylight hours we might sort of achieve during the summer period. So we are open to, during this temporary period, so I do note Council has funded through this financial year's budget to design up a sports ground lighting, and that will provide a different lighting spill. We've got lighting projects at Murphy Reserve where we've got sports ground lighting that point to the plain surface, not to surrounding areas, so that will help out in a future provision. Another thing we could look at in terms of shown some adjustment is we can, in terms of nights of the week, not activate these 7 days a week, not have them on the weekends where dog walking and passive activity can happen throughout the day more often, where the lights are just from a Monday to Friday during this trial period to try and achieve that balance until our future upgrades happen in future years.
Follow-up question, Councillor Pearl.
So there's no exact date that you would suggest that we would turn them off to match the daylight hours, because there's no date in the recommendation that you've provided. So would that be August, September? What date would you recommend to have the lights off where there's enough radiant sunlight where we can use recreation in that park without those lights?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I think daylight savings starts in October, so we can quickly look up when daylight savings commences and add that to the resolution for clarity.
Okay. Ms Blair?
To clarify, if we went daylight savings, that would be Sunday the 6th of October.
No, Councillor Voss, did you have a question?
I was going to ask about lighting spill, but I think Mr Trail has answered that, being the permanent lighting solution will take into account lighting spill, so won't go over certain areas. But Mr Strong did ask another question, and that was around lighting up the footpath where people walk primarily. Being a user of that park, I'm grateful for the Park Apartments lighting that spills over a little bit to sort of light it up a bit. In the new park plan, is there lighting along the path?
Through you, Acting Mayor, Council through the budget process has funded many initiatives at Lagoon Reserve to have a precinct approach. It will include looking at the cricket nets, the barbecue, the pavilion, the sports ground lighting and the sports ground upgrades. So yes, we can include considering the public lighting as part of that design this year.
Councillor Pearl?
The adjustment to the lights, the two flood, there's 3 lights, remember there's an LED light on the post and the 2 truck lights, as we'll call them. They've been angled down. It doesn't really seem to have made much of a difference from what I can see. Is there any quick fix we can do to have lights in that position or slightly forward that illuminate the ground and don't create large amounts of light pollution?
Through you, Acting Mayor, we've been out there several times to try and balance that right angle. They are old school floodlights and at a very low level. The difference with modern sports ground lighting is they're at a higher point and they're LEDs and they're pointed. It is a constraint at the moment that we have. We've made commitments to the community to try and monitor it to make sure they don't move and try and get an appropriate balance. So yes, we can continue to monitor it, but in its current structure, it's hard to achieve a better outcome than we've currently got.
I might ask a question, if I may, Mr Trail. Is it, I am no expert on how dark it gets, but is 5 o'clock dark? Do they need to go on at 5, or would 6 o'clock be appropriate, or is it still too dark at 5 o'clock to need to put them on?
Through you, Acting Mayor, current sort of daylight is appropriate for 5 o'clock. However, as we get closer to daylight savings, it does adjust. So we can continue to monitor, and obviously we don't want lighting on when there's appropriate daylight hours, so we can look at adjusting that. But we're conscious of trying to get electricians out to modify timers at the same time. So.
Okay, are there any further questions, or do I have a mover for this petition? Officer's recommendation. Councillor Voss to move it. A seconder? Councillor Brand. Councillor Voss, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to thank the community first and foremost, and and sporting groups for caring for Lagoon Reserve and being active. I think with their attention, it's meant that there's a better amenity there for all. Especially recently, there's been quite a lot of improvements. I'd also like to thank Mr Strong for coming out and his wife, and especially thank Stephen, Kerry, and Addie that have been the constant community members in this chamber, sort of really pushing forward on the Lagoon Reserve master plan going forward. So I just really encourage at this stage that we get on with the work planned and make Lagoon Reserve the place that it deserves to be.
Councillor Brand is next.
Propose an amendment, is that right?
Does the seconder need to speak before he can propose an amendment? Sorry, new to the gig. Is this... Sorry, Councillor Pearl. So, Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the... Councillor Brand?
Yes, I'd just like to thank Mr Strong for what I think is probably the most pleasant and reasonable submission made in this chamber for a long time. Thank you very much for that. Very reasonable, it seems to me. Speaking as an architect, I know we value light and we value dark, and neither should encroach on each other where they shouldn't be. And the answer is baffles on lights, so that everything that needs to be lit is lit and the rest of it can be dark, and we can enjoy darkness of stars, darkness of the mood of the place, darkness of the beauty of the whole evening without interference of unnecessary light. And we can also enjoy watching the people running around on the sports field in the light. So I hope we do something about that soon, and I think this is what this recommendation is about.
Councillor Pearl?
If I could just propose an amendment after the full stop on item 1. This will be reviewed by officers periodically, depending on seasonal sunset times.
So does that look correct, Councillor Pearl? Is this amendment... do I need a seconder, sorry, for the amendment? I'll second that one. So do I... Councillor, are you going to speak to it?
Yeah, I don't, instead of sitting here and voting against something which ultimately I agree with, I just don't think we've got the balance right here in terms of time. So I was thinking perhaps there's a way I can prescribe the officers to finish this at 8 o'clock and finish it in September, etc. But what the intention of this to do is to put the intention of council that we want the officers to have the flexibility to move these times based on community consultation. A petition is a direction from the public that they wish us to look and focus on something, and we've done that, and we've done that job very well in this instance. What the community should also expect of us, that we go out and we consult with people that are affected by it. And on this regard, we have information but not broad consultation. So what I'm intending to do is to demonstrate that this council's intention is to give officers the power to vary that time based on sunset times, and also based on consultation they may or may not receive. I haven't included the word consultation in this because I don't want officers to go out and do a large consultation process and delay the installation of new lights. Councillors, I hope this strengthens the motion. I hope you support the amendment.
Madam Acting Mayor, I did have a clarifying question before we started debate, but I didn't get my hand up in time. It was a clarifying question just to the CEO. Can't this be done under delegation? Does it need an actual motion?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I think the amendment provides greater clarity. I would have thought that at appropriate times to support the current activities, which is in the original motion, gives a degree of flexibility, but this clarifies it, and I don't think it. I think it adds to the motion and gives clear direction to staff. which we would do under delegation anyway, but it gives us a direction from staff.
Is that clarified enough, Councillor Baxter?
Just another clarifying question then.
Under standing orders, we can't ask clarifying questions once debate has commenced.
I understand that.
We have allowed them in the past. I will allow them at this point. Given that I'm in the big chair, I'm going to allow Councillor Baxter just one more.
So, sorry, would the specific thing talking about the seasonal sunset times restrict that flexibility from officers to only be looking at sunset times? Because there may be other things that may want them to...
Through Acting Mayor, the first part of the motion talks about current activities as well, so I think you'd look at both current activities and seasonal sunset times. I think it's clear.
All right, so we'll move back to the debate. I was a seconder. I don't want to speak to it. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Voss.
I do think it's overcooking the point, but I don't have any issues with what it's saying. I felt that the statement appropriate times to support current activities was enough, but if it's going to strengthen it, I don't have any issues with it.
Would anyone else like to speak to the amendment? If not, I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? The amendment's passed. So now we are going back to the substantive motion, which is with the addition, 4.3. Would anyone... so Councillor Voss, you have moved it. Councillor Brand, you have seconded it. Who has left to speak? We can Councillor Pearl or Councillor Baxter? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. As I said earlier, I don't think we've got the balance of this right in terms of public amenity of those lights. They're not built for the purpose which they're now being used for, and they're causing a substantial amount of light pollution into the apartments. I didn't actually realise how much light pollution was actually going into those apartments until I actually went and had a look myself. They provide good flood-lit activity for the residents to use the park for a few more hours in the evening, which is great, but the balance isn't right here, and we need to address that with a more permanent solution as soon as possible. So apologies to the people that have their public amenity or their private amenity substantially affected by these lights being turned on for additional hours. But at the moment, the net benefit probably is to the greater good of the community, but it is Council's responsibility to come up with a permanent solution to ensure that that private amenity isn't encroached upon for a very long period of time. Just want to thank officers over the past month in terms of the way you've dealt with a number of competing forces from our public residents on this issue, and you've behaved pretty professionally and come up with some reasonably good solutions in the meantime that have been well intentioned. The unfortunate thing is at every turn, every time we try to change something to make the situation more amenable for everybody, something else seems to pop up. The reflection of the roof now is the new one that is almost as bad as the original situation we were in. So, and that's nothing to do with the energy and attention that officers have paid to this issue. So let's see if we can move to a more permanent solution as soon as humanly possible.
Councillor Baxter, or can I move to the vote? All right, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Was that all those in favour? A show again. Yes, that's everyone? Okay, that's passed unanimously. I wanted to speak to the end. Sorry, I didn't see that was a bit later that you put your. I didn't see you put your hand up. Sorry, it's all right. We're going to move along. Yeah, I didn't see it when I asked. Sorry. All right. Item 4.4, the petition regarding upgrading of the off-leash dog reserves in Elwood. We don't have anyone from the public wanting to speak to this item. Are there any questions of the officers? Councillor Voss.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor. The question in the petition from the petitioners about addressing the access to the schoolyard use is not discussed or explored. I'm just wondering, should the officer's recommendation potentially be upgraded, or could it be changed to say that we suggest that the petitioners contact the school to fully round out that petition? Would that be something you would support?
Mr. Trowell?
Through you, Acting Mayor, we do have a joint use agreement for access to the school. It's been primarily based around recreation and sporting use. There could be some challenges. We as officers, we will engage with the school, but as per the petition, we've about to engage on some public space strategy, and we know these parks are popular based around our recent closure of Eastern Reserve, and this will be a question we like to ask in that public space strategy. We want to make sure that we've got the right space in this precinct. This petition shows there is demand for that area, and I'd like to use that public space strategy as the best way to find the best ongoing location for a dog park during that process.
Are there any other questions of the officers? Do I have a mover for the petition or the officer's recommendation? Councillor Baxter. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Voss. Councillor Baxter.
Just to thank the submitters for submitting this petition, and looking forward to the community engagement on the public space strategy.
Councillor Voss. Would any other councillors like to speak to this? Councillor Baxter, would you like to close? All right, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so that was the last of our petitions. So we're moving along. There are no documents that require sealing, so we shall go to public question time. Do we have anyone who has spoken? No, we don't have anyone who wants to speak in public question time. So now we're moving on to councillor question time. Councillors, do we have any further questions for the officers? Really? No? No? Okay. We shall move to the presentation of the reports then. So we are starting with 9.1, which is the Access and Inclusion Plan for 2019 to 21. So have we got anyone wanting to speak to this? No. We have no members of the public wishing to speak to this. So have we got any questions of the officers, councillors? Councillor Voss.
Yes, just looking through the report and note, a good solid plan with actions, but I didn't see any measures. I'm just wondering, what are we going to do about actually being able to measure some of these items?
Ms McGorry?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I might need to take that item on notice. The officer is in the building who's prepared the plan, so I may need to take that one on notice. But there will be an overarching project group that will manage the implementation of it, and the executive champion of that is the General Manager of Community and Economic Development. So there will be a measurement in place, but I can't articulate exactly what that is.
The CEO, Mr Smith, would like to
through Acting Mayor, and to answer Councillor Voss, my understanding is, Ms McGorry, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this follows a particular template and which didn't require measures. That doesn't mean we won't measure it. So
that's correct.
The measures will be developed, because this has come into the executive leadership team and I asked the same question. The measures will be developed as we implement the plan and measured through the steering committee for this. So the reason that they're not in this plan is it follows a particular template to meet some statutory requirements.
Councillor Voss.
And I guess I sort of think that some of it could be quite meaningless, and I worry about it. For example, we have there, I'm just picking one, let's increase the disability confidence of library staff. I do think we need to be confident that that's going to go up a reasonable amount and not just 0.25%. Otherwise, we're really creating just words on paper here. I'm really quite keen to see the measures and what that means.
Through you, Acting Mayor, I've spoken to Ms Onehill, who wrote the plan. She brought this into the executive team. This is a high-level plan. I'm not sure if she's here, Ms McGorry. Is she here? Here she is. We'll put the question to her. Thank you.
Do you want to put the question, or Ms Voss?
So, through you, Acting Mayor, Ms Onehill, the question was, which we previously answered, why wasn't there measures? And I've said this follows the template. But that measures will be developed and reported on as we implement the plan. And Councillor Voss was asking how would we get assurance that this is actually going to be meaningful and implemented?
Through you, Acting Mayor, thank you for the question. We do have a comprehensive implementation plan which will also be publicly, in terms of governance, we will make sure that we communicate it to the community online, but also in a public forum.
And through Acting Mayor and back to Council, there'll be regular reports to Council on this, on the implementation plan.
For you, Acting Mayor, yes, there will indeed be a report on that.
Councillor Voss.
Will councillors see these measures and get an opportunity to comment and approve, the level of the measures?
Ms McGorry.
Through Acting Mayor, yes, we can provide that.
Councillor Voss.
Who is on the Access and Inclusion Project Advisory Board? What is that made up of?
Ms Onehill.
For you, Acting Mayor, the Project Advisory Committee hasn't started off yet. We'll expect to have that soon. We have identified certain senior leaders in the organisation that we will invite to be on the committee.
So just to follow up, that's their council employees?
For you, Acting Mayor, that's correct.
Are there any further questions to this item? If that's the case, one more question, Councillor Voss.
Really poor response, unfortunately, to the consultation process around this. Was there any learnings from this, or can we do anything better? I mean, getting one person to a consultation response is pretty low.
For you, Acting Mayor, yes, whilst it's very disappointing, it wasn't unexpected, which is why we specifically have Action 1.1.1, which is to indeed broaden the engagement with the community. We have a number of measures already planned out, and hopefully indeed will prevent this happening in the future.
So any further questions? Do I have a mover for this motion? Councillor Voss, a seconder. Councillor Baxter. Councillor Voss, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, I would. I do want to note that there was a really poor response rate to this terrific, solid plan, and I'd have to congratulate the officers for the work that's been done. I do worry how seriously the general community take disability access, and I'm actually quite ashamed that there's been such little interaction with it. I am really happy that there is some prescriptive regulation to comply with it, being the 2006 Disability Act, because without that I'm even wondering what we'd even do. Recently I've travelled overseas, and for those 5 weeks I've pulled suitcases around, and I can tell you there's very few lifts or ramps or anything like we have in Australia, which I don't even think is very good overseas. It's absolutely horrendous, and so I can't imagine what getting around in a wheelchair, or if you've got some sort of disability, is like overseas. Because my first experience with sort of life with some sort of disability was when I first had my child, pushing around a pram, and can't believe how hard that was. So I'm very lucky not to have a disability, but I have some insights of what it could be, and I think we need to do a lot better So direction 2 in this plan being, we are connected and it's easy to move around, fully support that we do a lot more around accessing and inclusion to do better on that. When we consider 1 in 5 Australians live with disability, I do think that our community deserves so much more, to get involved with plans like this. It's incredibly important. So well done, and I certainly will be endorsing this. Thank you.
Councillor Baxter?
I echo the concerns about the consultation with the community members. Part of this, I think, we hope to improve on. I note that actions 1.3.1 and 1.3.2 are about increasing the accessibility of our online digital content to meet the WCAG 2.1 standards. This is actually really important. I have constituents who have disabilities who are homebound and can really only engage through online means, and if those online means aren't accessible, how are people supposed to actually feed into this? So as we get better at that, we hopefully will increase the two-way conversation that we're having with our community about disability. Disability is not an issue for people who have disabilities. It's actually an issue for our society. It's the fact that we don't have a ramp in that particular place is what's keeping that person disabled, not whatever injury or something they may have received. So the more that we can actually break down those barriers and build in and make our society a more accessible place, easy to get around, easy to access information, easy to read things, the more we can actually start to remove what this actual disability is. And in the end, there won't really be disability, because the fact that you're in a wheelchair doesn't disable you in terms of getting around much. So I'm really keen to see us moving more on this. I'm hoping we can engage more with our community on these sorts of things, because it is very, very important for local governments all across Australia, and indeed state and federal.
Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? I might just speak to it. So I have quite a few friends with disabilities, and I know how smart and wonderful they are, but they don't always get the opportunity for employment, and I know how great they would be. Some of them are employed and some are not. And I just do think that local government is one of those areas where we should be leading in employment in this space, and so I really welcome this plan and looking to becoming an employer of choice more than we are. The other thing that excites me is just in the realm of, technology can be isolating, but there's a whole new realm of technology that might make access to certain things for people with disability, especially not being able to get around, to be included in a whole lot of things. And I think that that's something coming down the line that will be great for this space. The one area that I did, I wanted to highlight though, and it's 3.4. So, when we talk about disability, often we think of our physical surroundings, but so much of disability is mental health. And I know that there's the Royal Commission into mental health happening at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully some of the really big changes and models that will come out of that. But I do think we have to remember that mental health is actually, it's probably not as visually obvious, and it's something that never goes away. And I think that that's something that we really need to look to in our community, because again, local government is about building community and strengthening our communities. So again, I think that this is a really good step forward, and I look forward to the measures and the things that we can implement on the basis of this plan. So I will put that to, Councillor Voss, did you want to close? Sorry. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Are you a bit slow? All those in favour? Can I just check again? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, ladies. We're going to move along to report number 9.2, which is the Community Grants Program for 1920, the recommendations for funding. I don't have anyone from the community wishing to speak. Let me just... Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl, are you happy to move it? So Councillor Pearl is happy to move. Councillor Voss to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak then? You reserve your right. Councillor Voss. Would any other councillors like to speak? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. There were quite a lot of very worthy applications that came in, and this was my first time being on one of these panels to look at this, and it is a really daunting sort of job to look at what's the best way we can get value out of these council funds to put towards some of these amazing projects. I found it a really fantastic experience, and I've learned a lot about what some organisations and individuals are doing in our community to make this a lot better place, and I feel very proud that our council is willing to put so much money, although could always be more, but so much money towards these sorts of projects.
I'll just quickly speak to it. I was also on the panel for the community grants program. Thank you to the officers for all the hard work that we went through. It's a lot of what are they, Excel charts and everything to get it all right. Again, this is my third year on this panel, and the thing that always astounds me is that for every dollar council puts in, we get so much bang for our buck, like 100-fold. And again, it's about creating community. So I'm very happy with some of the organisations that we will be giving this money to, and looking forward to the programs that they will deliver for us. Councillor Pearl.
Thank you, Councillors Baxter and Crawford, and the community representatives that were on the panel to judge these, and the officers. So there's a huge amount of work in the assessment process, as well as the applicants making the grants. But well done to the two councillors who were on that. It's a huge volume of work to go through, and we appreciate your hard work on this committee. Thank you.
So on that, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Okay, so the next report that we're looking at is 11.1, the Clean Streets Service Review. So we don't have any members of the public wishing to speak to this. Other councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Voss. So Ms Blair, Mr Johnson? Who's going? Mr Johnson, and I don't know the gentleman next to you.
Mr Dunstan.
Mr Dunstan, that's a surname. That's one of the hard jobs about being in this position, is I don't know everyone's surnames. So welcome, gentlemen. Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask the officers for examples of what things might be on the list for cost recovery for after-hours activities. If you could give some examples of what that might be.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, could you just clarify the question you're asking Councillor Voss?
Yes, one of the recommendations somewhere or other was that the after-hours options would consider full cost recovery on some items that are requested, and I'm just wondering what would they be? Can I have some examples of what might be considered to need, would be considered to have cost recovery?
Mr Dunstan.
Through you, Acting Mayor. I think the few of the examples that the consultant prepared the report was referring to are things like we do spend a certain amount of time that are not, say, emergency services. They're not responding to a biohazard or an incident that requires immediate attention, but after hours does spend a fair bit of time performing tasks such as finding people's keys in between boardwalks, opening up litter bin surrounds to find wallets or wedding rings or those sort of things. So there's the thrust of that was towards potentially charging for those services.
Any other questions? Councillor Voss.
Yes. I just was wondering how, say, GPS and telemetrics work with streets. We'll work with streets that have cars parked in them, in particular around the dirt that's built up in the gutters. So how are we going to make sure that they are cleaned on a monthly basis rather than so with the truck we can measure, because that just goes up and down the street but it doesn't get into the gutters. That's a big beef of mine and my communities. I'm just wondering how is that technology going to help?
Through you, Acting Mayor. So GPS obviously in the trucks can tell you where a street sweeper has gone, so you can see whether a street has been swept. Telemetrics is a way of telling whether the street sweeper, the brush, is actually in contact with the ground or whether it's not. Obviously, you can then also tell about how much sweepings are being picked up by the truck, so then you can use that information to work out what level of cleaning has been provided on a street. So in theory, you can see differences in volumes about when street sweeping is done on different streets, and you can collect data in that way. Just more generally, having that GPS data and that telemetrics data can enable us to make evidence-based decisions, so we can look at whether some streets are prone to heavier amounts of sedimentation, whether street sweepers can actually have better access to some streets to be able to sweep streets better at certain times of day, those kind of things. At the moment, without that data, a lot of the decisions have to be made based off anecdotal evidence, whereas with that technology in the fleet, that enables us to make evidence-based decisions.
Councillor Voss.
So through you, Madam Mayor, if I could just add to that, is as part of the consultation that will be occurring around the Council's car parking policy, we're also going to ask some questions around people's appetite to move their cars at particular times of the day to enable us to be able to clean more effectively. So we'll get some feedback from the community through that process as well.
So that was going to be my follow-up question, because I wanted to know what is the solution for the streets, cleaning the gutters for the streets that have cars, because that seems to be the problem that I get asked about.
So through you, Acting Mayor, further to what Ms Blair said, getting the cars off the streets would make it much more efficient to be able to clean the streets. The report refers to the difference in cost being about 5 to 6 times the cost of having to sweep a street where cars remain there, because you not only can sweep part of the street with a street sweeper, you then need crews and trucks to be able to sweep from the property boundaries to the curb, and then also blow the material from underneath those parked cars out to the street where the street sweeper can pick it up. So ultimately, the easiest solution would be to have those cars removed. As Ms Blair said, the community consultation, which is commenced today for the parking policy, is asking that question to see whether there's an appetite for that. There are also other, we're looking at other technologies to do that in other ways, so about better use of blower vacs and those kind of things as well. But it is quite an intractable problem that a lot of municipalities have to grapple with.
Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Voss.
Last one from me, and I don't think it was addressed, at least I didn't see it, and that is tenant behaviours when they exit a property, and the dumping of whatever they don't need, which is a very common problem in particular areas, like St Kilda, a great one. What obligations, or actually how is it tenant behaviour addressed in this strategy, i.e. the rental property, is it addressed at all?
Through you, Acting Mayor, so the review into dumped rubbish and hard waste does speak to the opportunities to engage with the difficulties of engaging with tenants. It speaks to opportunities there to engage with rental agencies, so be that real estate agents, to actually try and be proactive in this space. Fair to say that the review identified a lot of things that have already been picked up in council's don't waste it strategy. So there's behaviour change, and then there's a certain degree of enforcement and things that go together. But connecting with tenants in particular when they relocate is a very difficult problem. So really, the proposal that's been spoken about is to engage with them through the rental agencies.
Councillor Voss.
Sorry, I thought that was my last question, but what opportunities are there? Because I don't think there is enough responsibility taken by the real estate agencies. They have a bond that's kept, and they go and check the property, but they perhaps ignore any rubbish that's outside the property that possibly anyone with eyes could identify that it's probably come from that property. What opportunities are there to perhaps in our local laws even to make sure that they have an obligation to call up the council to get that rubbish removed, or even keep some of the bond? I don't know. We need to think about this, but surely they have an obligation for their tenants' rubbish that are going on the street, which they keep a bond in order to make sure that they make good the property.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the challenge we always have with any form of dumped rubbish is being able to get enough evidence to show who it was or where it was the rubbish actually came from, and that is whether that's in front of a house or whether that's directly in front of some units. So that is the challenge. So we do, the local laws now do carry out investigations, and one of the proposals that we put forward in our specifications for going out for our new dumped and hard rubbish service looked at allowing dumped rubbish to stay there for a longer period of time to enable us to undertake investigations, so that we've got that in to have a look at doing that as a trial. We do, as Mr Johnson mentioned, we do try and work with agencies, and in particular we also work with the Department of Housing where there are issues there around trying to manage that. But it's not simple. It's quite complex, and we'll continue to look at different avenues to try and improve that.
Any further questions, councillors? Do I have a mover? Somebody? Councillor Voss, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Baxter. Councillor Voss, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I've been waiting for this Clean Streets review for some time, and I just wanted to thank the officers very much for their time to review our cleaning regime. And I think it's terrific that we've looked at it in a holistic way, because we definitely need to improve our cleaning, really to meet our community's expectations. And I think just the simple act of setting realistic timeframes, and sticking to them will be a substantial improvement in our service levels. So even though I think they're on the website, we're killing our streets every 2 weeks, so that never gets done. We all know that. So just by moving it out to every 4 weeks and sticking to it, I think is a fantastic improvement. So looking at the shopping precincts, I would encourage, we do things like really focus on bin top cleaning, and in particular, the dog urine, making sure that that the shopping precincts are more pressure cleaned more often. The rapid response idea, I think, is an interesting one. I hope it works and really takes the stress off our programmed work. And I really like that we've identified that we've got, a number of different service providers, and our community is quite confused about what the different companies do and what their responsibilities. So fixing that, I think, will actually go quite a long way. But I do think that we have missed a big opportunity here for rental agencies to take responsibilities for tenant behaviour on exit and dumping rubbish. And I hear what's been said, and I understand the difficulties, but I do think we need to continue to tackle that issue, because they continue to get away with it. And I think, quite frankly, the agencies are probably rubbing their hands that they don't have to deal with that, because they probably know whose it is. But I'm quite keen to monitor the success of this strategy, and hopefully we get a report back at some stage before 3 years on how it's going. So well done, and thanks very much, and I'm really pleased to endorse this report going out.
Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Acting Mayor. I'm also was quite keen on this review. There are a number of things here that we funded in the budget that I'm not particularly happy with the cost necessarily, but it seems that we've got to step up our game here, and that costs money. So particularly for me, representing Canal Ward, the autumn leaf fall extra funding is pretty important. I'm sure Councillor Crawford will agree with me that that's a priority to our constituents down in Elwood in particular. But that it's not always just an autumn leaf fall these days with climate change messing with things. We can have all sorts of heat stress and events that can cause leaf fall, and we want to make sure that we're properly equipped for that. So I agree that I want us to be able to do more in areas that it seems impossible to do more in, I totally get why that's the case. But I'm hoping that we're going to be continually innovating and thinking about how we can break down some of these barriers to making sure that we're providing a great service and making sure that our community looks nice.
Any other councillor like to speak to this? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much. This is one area that this council should be very proud of in terms of the amount of investment we've put in. When we came into this council in 2016, we'd seen a decrease in budget expenditure from 5.7 million to 5.1 million. Under this council alone, there'll be a $4.4 million increase from 2015-16 to 2020, which is hugely substantial compared to other areas. And going forward to the forward estimates under this proposal to 2022, it's an additional $2 million from what we're currently spending. So a hugely sizable investment. It's core business for council. Our community expects a clean, safe environment, and that's what this council is committed to do so. Wholeheartedly support the report that's been put in front of us this evening.
Councillor Brown, did you want to speak to it? I will. Litter is my obsession, a bit OCD about it these days. But I will confess, I live in a block of flats that is constantly dumping, not me personally, and I never know who does it. Like, it's just there. Like, we park your car at 11 o'clock at night and by 6 o'clock in the morning, there is stuff. So I'm not telling you where I live so that we might have used our 6 pickups for the year. However, it is something we do need to endeavour to continue to do. I am really glad to see one budget item in there, because I think with all the street sweepers and everything like that, there is still rubbish that needs to be picked up by hand or by the long picker-upper devices. So we are actually funding more litter picker-uppers around our shopping precincts, because I think that that's the litter that gets into garden beds and cigarette butts and the things that in the end they build up and look horrific. So I'm really glad that we're funding that, and I'm hoping that will make a difference. Obviously, my plea to the community is that we can't do it all without you, and one, don't drop the litter, but two, if you see it, perhaps pick it up. There are some wonderful organisations that do a lot of volunteer work in this space. Beach Patrol along all our beaches, love our streets, and you can go out 1 hour a month and help pick up litter in our community. We have ploggers where they jog and pick up rubbish at Elwood every Saturday. So please contact me and find out more. I do want to also mention, just with our staff, we have a particular staff member who's an exemplary staff member who's a litter picker. And Mitchell, if we could hire 100 Mitchells, I'd be so damn happy, because sometimes you need to acknowledge the really fantastic work that happens within council. The officers that have worked on this over the time, these are excellent reports. You know, the other thing that I've noticed is we haven't given our cleaning crews often the technology, or we haven't updated the technology to actually make it feasible for them to have a much easier way of managing all this. So hopefully with the tools that we're giving the team and the excellent people that are working in this space, I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to less litter, and that includes you, community. So I am very happy to support this review and the budget that goes with it. So I'll put that to the vote. Oh no, sorry, I keep forgetting to go return. Councillor Voss, would you like to speak? No. Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Can I put a double hands up for that one? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we are now moving on to 11.2, which is the Elster Creek Catchment Project, April to June 2019 update. And we have one member of the public. Mr. Love, would you like to approach the bench, as they say, or the table, and state your name and suburb, please?
Certainly, Madam Mayor, and thank you and councillors and officers for this opportunity to address you and possibly for Brett to have one last chance to shine in his current job. On behalf of both EFLAG and the Elsternwick Park Association, I would like to endorse the officers' recommendations and thank Council for its support on both the Elster Catchment and the Elsternwick Park North projects. City of Port Phillip's leadership and commitment has been vital to both these projects, as has been the support of the Port Phillip Eco Centre in engaging the community and providing resources and advocacy. Having accidentally crashed the recent officers' workshop on the Elster Catchment, it was encouraging to see that visionary projects of the type EFLAG has been advocating are being undertaken and implemented. The City of Kingston's Edithvale stormwater recycling is a great example, as is COP's project in Alma Park, even though it's not in the Elster Catchment. A lesson to draw from this is that combined officer and community representative meetings can be more productive than having separate officer and community representative meetings. This is the case with the City of Bayside Elsternwick Park North Community Reference Panel, where I'm pleased to report that detailed planning is proceeding apace, with earthworks slated to commence next year, and community groups are already engaged in rubbish collection and fauna surveys in the park. The issue of flood management in the nature reserve has improved, with Bayside Council now considering 5 options, I think, rather than the 2 original ones. However, the matter of whole of park flood management, i.e. north and south, as well as the ovals in the north, is that the matter of whole of park flood management is still unclear, and the question of when an action at officer level triggers the engagement of the Memorandum of Understanding that the 4 catchment councils are signatory to is also not clear. I have also noticed a number of media reports about sea level rise and coastal hazard management, including one with a photo of 2 Bayside councillors, Laurie Evans and Rod Grinter, knee-deep in the waters of the bay. Councillors would remember that coastal flooding has always been a major concern of EFLAG's, and that we have been an advocate for timely preparation for the profound impact that this will bring. So I have some questions for Council and officers, and they are: firstly, what is the trigger for action by the Elster Catchment Forum when an action by any council officer contravenes the Memorandum of Understanding? And secondly, is council addressing the threat of coastal flooding as a matter of urgency, and what measures are being considered for the mouth of the Elwood Canal at the base of the Elster Catchment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Mr. Walters, would you like to respond, please? And your team?
And my team, yes. Through you, Acting Mayor. Is that okay? Madam Acting Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Love, for the opportunity to respond to your questions. The first question was surrounding how matters that may contravene the Memorandum of Understanding are raised. And the Memorandum of Understanding is a device that sets up the willingness to collaborate between the various parties. So, in effect, there's no real downside to that. What we do is collaborate, and when issues are raised by the community and Mr. Love and his colleagues make us aware of issues, that the forums that have been created that are supported by that Memorandum of Understanding are used to discuss those issues, most chiefly being the CEO's forum and the working group that supports that forum. And for broader catchment issues, one of the key deliverables that is almost complete is the development of a flood management plan for the catchment. So that's a key piece of work that's currently underway. With respect to coastal flooding, the City of Port Phillip's a member of the Association of Bayside Municipalities, and which is multiple councils working with DELP on coastal flooding. But I invite Ms O'Mahony to provide a little bit more detail on our actions around coastal flooding.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Council officers are currently working with the Victorian Government on developing a coastal hazard assessment. So this is a large piece of work that's being led by the DELP, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and that will be looking at Port Phillip Bay and looking at different climate change scenarios and assessing the impact of sea level rise, groundwater and erosion around the entire bay. The Association of Bayside Municipalities that Mr Walters referred to earlier, they are currently working on a coastal hazard planning guide that will assess all the options for changes to our planning scheme in response to sea level rise as well. One more thing, that DELP have also just released a draft marine and coastal policy for comment, and we'll be providing comment on that and attending their workshops that are scheduled for early August.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions of the officers? No? Mr. Councillor Baxter? No. Okay, thank you. Would I have someone to move, Councillor Pearl, to move the motion? Who would like to second it? Councillor Baxter. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to it? Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak to the item? All right, well then on that case I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving right along to 14.1, which is the Assembly of Councillors. We have no one from the public wanting to speak to this. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Do we have a mover? Councillor Pearl, a seconder. Councillor Voss. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to it? Councillor Voss. Would anyone else like to speak to it? Councillor Pearl, would you like to reply? Let's put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. So then we're moving to item 14.2, which is the property policy, the release of the draft policy. We again have no one from the public wishing to speak to this. So councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
Just in relation to the points around negotiation, the way that's worded is almost like, obviously you're creating a policy to provide some standardisation to the process, but it almost sounded like the way it's worded that negotiation would not be a default position. So as in negotiation will be allowed to take place under certain circumstances. When this policy, assuming this gets done and dusted and it rolls out, how do you see the practical application of this policy being substantially better for the leaseholders in the lease renewal process than what we currently have. The reason I'm asking that question is just the tone of the negotiation section appeared to me that we have a policy, negotiation can be done under certain circumstances, but the policy should always prevail, which kind of makes sense. But I'm interested to see your intention as an officer about how you see this policy will actually work through the renewal process and how it's better than what we currently do.
Ms O'Neill.
Through you, Acting Mayor. The intent, the way that it will practically apply is that the policy will guide when it is definitely not appropriate to undertake a direct negotiation. And so we did start with when would it, so by default, direct negotiation is not allowed and when would it be allowed, but it actually, practically speaking, it is much more practical to look at when it is not applicable and to be clear about that and consistent about that so that there are no expectations that are raised that by tenants that are in place where it is practically not going to be assessed. Other circumstances need to be taken, so where it will be assessed, so where those conditions are not in place, then it is open for a recommendation to council about when that is appropriate, but that's how it will practically apply.
Through you,
Mr. Carroll.
Madam Mayor. I think just to answer that question a bit more deeply, how this policy more broadly will be better for both council and for tenants is that it sets much clearer ground rules around when and how we negotiate leases and licences. At the moment, there's a bit of inconsistency around how things are approached. There's a lot of toing and froing between tenants and from council because of that lack of consistency and certainty and the ground rules not being in place. And the process ended up being quite elongated and frustrating for all parties that are involved at times. And you've seen some examples of those that we've been through recently. I think this sets a very clear framework for the community and for tenants to work with, and also for council officers and council to work with. It still enables negotiation within that framework. So there will always be points, even on leases that are not subject to a direct negotiation, but through a competitive process, there'll still be room for negotiation as part of that process.
Councillor Voss.
So, thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to express a concern that I have around many of our smaller community groups. They're all volunteers. And now with this policy, they'll be faced with paying insurance and maintenance and electricity and water and all sorts of things that many of them have never done before. And quite simply, if they have to do that, they'll either have to innovate and charge a lot higher fees, or some of them will just disappear and won't be able to cope. Just wondering how we're going to address that going forward. It's not really outlined in the policy.
Ms O'Neill.
Through you, Acting Mayor. This policy proposes a framework for decision making. It doesn't specify how council may choose to and who council may choose to support, at what level council may provide support. So council, this policy provides a framework for council to make informed decisions about the level of support it will provide to every single community group. And that includes things like the level of discounted rent, the amount of, so whether or not council may provide support via a direct funding agreement, through covering utility bills, through paying for the insurance. But it does set a base case of that organisations will pay for certain things unless there is a reason for them to not cover that, and that could be because of the value that they provide and the value that council, the amount of value that council places on the service that it provides, those organisations. So the level of support ultimately that council provides to every single group will be determined through a consistent process. Basically, that's what this policy is providing for. And so council still ultimately has the decision making around whether or not they will cover certain things. But at the moment, there are community groups that pay and there are community groups that don't pay for things like insurance, maintenance, and there is no standardised process for decision making around which ones do and which ones don't. So this is just providing a more standardised, transparent, consistent and fair process for decision making for council.
Councillor Pearl.
And if I can add to
Mr. Carroll first.
So there's another complementary piece of work that's going on at the moment around the community grants program. So in some cases we're providing support not as transparently today through subsidising those costs, those on costs, the water bills, the insurance. And as Ms McNeil highlighted, that's really inconsistent. Some small groups are paying them and some small groups aren't, and some are paying a mix, and so it's all over the place. Well, one of the key things we're trying to achieve here is fairness and transparency. And we believe, as a principle, it's more fair and more transparent for that support to be provided through grants mechanisms, although there will be some work to do in these two policies aligning. And one of our fundamental principles in here as well is around a transition approach, so it won't change overnight, and we'll make sure it's lined up. And we also take into consideration the capacity of those organisations to pay as part of this implementation.
So Councillor Pearl was next.
Thanks. How much work have we done on forecasting the rollout and integration of this policy? So a small example I've come across recently is community gardens. I met with the people in Sol Green who have been advised by council or told by council to incorporate, so therefore that they would be ready to take a lease, which they went to some great expense to do. They've also been told they need to take out insurance, albeit they're operating on council land, which we wouldn't require people going to the library regularly, for example, to take out insurance. They're using a council space, albeit people might have a shovel in their hand, they're still effectively using a council space for a community purpose. Through that experience, they've also learnt that there's other community garden groups that don't have any incorporation, don't have any leases, don't have any licences, and don't require to pay insurance, etc., albeit they're operating on council land. So in that small, and then if I did a subset of the half a dozen to a dozen community gardens that we have in the city, there's going to be a wider variety of different arrangements. So, and that's just one small segment. So I don't know how many groups this is going to affect, but what is your plan for integration, and what work have you done to ensure that the next request coming back once the policy approved isn't a budget request for another $500,000 for 4 people to actually administer the monster that we've created, so to speak?
Ms O'Neill.
Through you, Acting Mayor, we have looked at the forward program of leases and licences that will be coming up, and have planned out the forward program of which ones will need to be addressed and how many over time. We also have been preparing for this over the past year with our recommendations to Council about the length of leases in the forward program that's proposed. So the leases and licences that are up for renewal this year were thought of in the context of this policy coming into play. So there are a number of leases and licences that are coming up this year that were proposed for a three-year term, which gives us time to start implementing this policy without instantly having to roll over everything into it all at once. We will also come up with a transition plan in more detail once the policy and the work that's being done on the community funding policy is completed, to look at specific leases and licences that are coming up and what changes might be contemplated. Transition arrangements would then need to be also contemplated if there are major changes to any particular leases or licences that are currently in place.
Councillor Voss.
Through you.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
I can just add to that, because the community gardens are actually a really good case study, and there are a range of arrangements in place, and that's been part of the issue around the consistency and how that's being managed. And part of it's around what requirements do we have to make sure that that land is actually being used in a way that's not quasi-privatisation for a select group. So the idea around incorporation and other things is to make sure that it's managed appropriately and that broad community access can be provided to those particular areas. In other cases, we have had examples, unfortunately, where there's been significant issues around soil contamination, etc., that council then had to come in and manage and clean up after the fact. So part of this is just trying to make sure that we have got a more consistent quality approach to how we do it, but we do need to think about the cost impacts as we go, and the transition arrangements and the forecasting alongside the community grants program will help us manage that.
Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I just had a follow-up question to Mr Carroll's answer previously around the transition approach, so in particular around transparency. So I understand there will be some sort of grant or subsidy process so we can see how much each community is being subsidised to do their activities. Can I ask the question around the cost of that and what the budget will be? So as I understand, we get $3.6 million in revenue currently, and council spends around $7.2 million annually on maintenance and renewal of the building portfolio. Would that budget for grants be equivalent to that $7.2 million, or how will we come up with a figure? I'm interested.
So,
Mr Carroll.
Yeah, so through you, Acting Mayor, Madam Mayor, Acting Madam Mayor. So in some ways it happens on a case-by-case basis. So there's recently been some changes to accounting standards, which requires us from an accounting perspective to now record the full value of the leases that we provide to the community in our accounts. And maybe Ms McNeil can help me, but the latest assessment that we did on that in terms of the level of subsidy that's actually been provided is $8 million, $7 or $8 million. It's really significant, so there's now much more transparency about how we provide that. Now that's largely an opportunity cost. What's a real cost is when we meet the costs around things like the insurance or the water bills. Now we're currently paying for that. The concept here would be, rather than us paying for that in a non-transparent way, that may be transferred into a grants program. The net bottom line impact to council should be relatively minor, if anything at all. So from a theoretical perspective, now this needs to be done on a case-by-case basis, from a theoretical perspective we would save on one part of the council expenditure, and we're providing additional support to these community groups to meet those requirements through a more transparent and potentially, over time, competitive process. Now we need to do that assessment on a case-by-case basis, and in some cases where the support may need to be greater, that might be offset in some cases where overall we're not providing as much support because some of these community groups are building their capacity and able to contribute more.
Councillor Voss.
So if I can put that in dollar forms, it wouldn't exceed $8 million. It'd have to be less than that, given some of them will be building their capacity.
Yeah, so sorry. The $8 million is kind of an indication of the overall community value that we're providing through subsidised leases, but it's not a direct cost to council today, whereas those other costs that I've talked about, which I haven't got on the top of my head at the moment, that I haven't been able to quantify for you, but what I'm highlighting there is that, generally speaking, that will result in a reduction in one area and an increase in another and should net out.
Do you have a follow-up question, Councillor Voss, or would...
I'm happy to let Councillor Brand.
Councillor Brand.
I have a question which follows up from one of Councillor Voss's previous questions about smallish volunteer clubs and how some of these arrangements affect them, and it's one thing which is just playing in my mind. I'm interested to see how the policy would handle it, and I suppose flag it as something we might watch out for. But in terms of Councillor Voss was saying that many clubs have not paid maintenance before, and now maybe there is a policy to make them responsible for the maintenance of the club. What happens in a situation like that, where I think this applies to clubs like, well, obviously there's some life-saving clubs, sporting clubs, quite a variety of clubs, I think, where they tend to do their own maintenance. They are responsible for maintaining the place in a way, but they've done it themselves, and now council would say, they would formally make them responsible for maintenance, but for paying for the maintenance, but that council would do the maintenance themselves, which is an obviously cleaner and more efficient way of doing it. But those clubs, part of their identity and heart and soul is that they volunteer and they do their own voluntary sort of almost ad hoc maintenance, and that's part of what makes the club work. I'm just wondering how we deal with potential inefficiencies like that are very important for the...
Mr Carroll's going to take that one on.
Yeah, through you, Acting Madam Mayor. Look, I think we have to take a practical approach to it. In some cases, when it comes to doing things like, electrical repairs, air conditioning repairs, to the fabric of the building, it needs to be done these days, it will need to be done to a quality standard. We do, in those kind of cases, like to take on responsibility ourselves and on charge the cost of that to make sure it's done to a high standard and in compliance. There's always going to be opportunities for these clubs and others to do their continuous kind of working bees and do some minor enhancements and repairs themselves. I can't set a hard and fast rule about it, but it's something that we can continue to allow within certain parameters. But when it comes to things like, and we've seen, and I've witnessed the impacts of when we don't manage this. We have major issues around compliance with wiring and electrics in the building, leading to fire hazards. We've had examples of where security systems have been shut off, so emergency egress has been shut off inadvertently through tenants taking on some of this work themselves and not thinking through the broader implications of the building maintenance.
Councillor Voss.
Just going back to the grants component again, I feel it's missing from this document to sort of create the whole picture. How are we going to explain this to the community, in order to be transparent about how this transitional approach is going to occur?
Ms O'Neill.
Through you, Acting Mayor, the reference is made to the community funding policy, but we've deliberately focused on the aspects of property management that need to be covered in this policy and referred where it's about the level of contribution. We've talked about the process for that being assessed, which is through the community funding policy. And so we just need to make sure that that's clearly understood when we're explaining this policy, is that this policy is not a policy that decides or guides how council allocates or what level of support is allocated. That is through a different policy, and that the two policies are designed to work together. And so we just, in our key messaging and our communications and in the workshop with the community, we'll make sure that we're clear about what the purpose of this policy is, which is about property management, and what the community funding policy does, which is about the allocation of funding, and that's direct funding, indirect funding through things like discounted rent.
Are there any further questions, or Mr CEO?
Through Acting Mayor, to address Councillor Voss's concerns, Ms McNeil, could we do a worked example which demonstrates how Clause 210 and 213 work together? 210 being the exemption that the community organisations may be exempt subject to 213, which outlines the community grants policy. I think it would be useful in the engagement to do a sort of hypothetical worked example to demonstrate to community tenants how that might work. Would that be possible?
Through you, Acting Mayor, yes, we can absolutely do that.
Councillor Voss? So just one last question again. So just to be clear, so someone applies for a lease or a licence or a lease, and then they then have to apply for a grant. So there'll be two application processes, or it'll all be handled in a single one. I'm just wondering, how is it going to be more efficient, being that's the goal of this process?
Ms O'Neill?
Through you, Acting Mayor, the process, we have the intention, and that's what the policy sets. The process for doing that, we still need to map out, and that will be set out very clearly. And the intention is that there's only one process. So at the moment, there's a funding deed may come to council, and then a lease may come to council. That's for the same property at the moment. So that's how it happens at the moment. The idea is for the funding deed and for the lease, so the council's total contribution to a community group in a building, including a funding deed and the discounted rent and the length of term, all come in the same process to council, and council may receive a number of those all at the same time to consider across to make sure that they've got a full understanding of the quantum of things that are being requested for that particular year. So it might be that they come as an annual process rather than ad hoc, and it will be considering all of the ways council fund those groups together in one go. It will be something along the lines of the community funding that already comes to council, so the community funding that was considered tonight, for instance.
Councillor Brand.
Just on that point, when we look at the big picture of funding deed and lease together, and there are many examples where that happens, and it's usually because whatever that body is performing some sort of function that council desires to be performed, and it's best performed through whatever the organisation is. They get combined together, and we get a clear picture of council's financial support, because we look at both how much they're funding and also how much they're sort of conceding with off commercial rates and what have you, commercial rental rates, and that's transparent and fine, but it does tend to highlight the cost of the organisation and not so much the value of it. Is there any possibility that we can somehow go with that, accompany that with an idea of how much it would cost for council to do that service themselves in-house rather than what is actually being put out there? I'm just wondering if it's even relevant for this point, but it's just the transparency that we're using. The transparency that we're achieving with this policy tends to highlight the cost rather than the value of what that organisation may be doing with the subsidy.
Ms McNeil.
Through you, Acting Mayor, the intention is to bring both the value of council's contribution and the value that the organisation is proposing to deliver together and present that to council for consideration. It is what we already attempt to do, but there's the policy proposes a more standardised approach, which is about mapping in better detail and better articulating the community benefits that are being delivered through council's contribution by way of making a property available or through a funding deed, and including things like covering the cost of renewal of that building over time. And so it's just improving that process to make sure that the full value of a community group to the organisation is presented and articulated.
Are there any further questions Do I have a mover for the motion? Councillor Pearl, do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to it? Your reserve. Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Acting Madam Mayor. I'm happy for this to go out to community consultation. I think there's been a lot of work done on it and a lot of community. There's been some consultation, and I guess I have to say I've been contacted by many in the community over the years, and that's had varying experiences with leases and licences and all sorts of things with the experience with property renewals, and their frustrations is around the inefficiencies, the slowness, the non-transparency, as well as the inconsistency. And I'm really satisfied that we have tried to address all of those issues there. So I'm very keen to see what the community is going to think about this. I do think we need to improve our services drastically, and to do that we need to standardise. And I think that's where we're going. And certainly we need to improve the experiences of all that interact with our property department. We have got a substantial asset, and we need to make sure that's preserved and even grown. The most controversial and sort of contested area, based upon the data here, and certainly from my own experience, is how the tenants pay or whether the tenants pay for their own outgoings. And from our perspective, and from the you'd say, well, that makes sense, but I really have some reservations around how that's going to be received within the community, in particular many of the very small community groups, and then again how they're going to also progress their grant application should they qualify or even get it. I see the benefits of this property policy very clearly from Council's perspective. I think it's absolutely spot on. I see the benefits of it, most of it, from the residents and some of the community perspective, but I also see certain shortcomings and some confusion, and that's primarily around perhaps how the grant's going to work, whether there's going to be more work for the volunteers. It's a different process. Maybe it's going to take some transition time to bed it in, but I do think we need to be a little flexible going forward. But most of all, what we're doing at the moment is sending this out for consultation, and fully endorse that approach, and be open to ideas, and be understanding from what the community is going to tell us. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this? If not, Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much, Mayor. 3 quick things to say on this. Councillors, we obviously asked for this a number of years ago, probably two and a half years ago when we first came in. In some cases, I tend to reflect, having reviewed the draft now, perhaps we weren't exactly clear on what we asked for, but also we weren't necessarily aware of the secondary order effects that would come out of this policy. So there's still a fair bit of work to do, I suspect, on this. And I don't think personally, I didn't understand how complex this area would be. Secondly, from my point of view, dud deals drove this, coming across inconsistent leases and licences in the city that don't benefit the vast majority of the population of the city is what this council is trying to avoid. There's sporting facilities in the city that don't meet any generally accepted form of community acceptable terms in their lease, whereas others probably go out of their way to ensure that they do embrace the community. There's also commercial deals which don't provide financial benefit to the city when they should. That's what's driven the policy, and this council's taken a huge amount of effort to ensure that we rectify some of those problems of the past, but naturally we've now also uncovered a number of problems, which is why this is going out to consultation, because we're not always the experts. We don't always know best, so it'll be interesting to see what feedback we get back from this consultation. And finally, the third thing is the concerns. My biggest concern is that we're creating a barrier to entry to the people we actually don't want to be creating a barrier to. And I'll be interested to gather that feedback, and community grants, which Councillor Voss has eloquently and more than adequately uncovered through her questioning is obviously a key thing we need to look at going forward. At the end of the day, you can see from the group of councillors here, from the level of questioning this evening, that councillors deeply care about this issue, and this is something I think all councillors on this council would like to see as a legacy that they leave when this council dissolves or resolves next year. So thanks to officers for getting this out there, but obviously a lot more work to do, and I'm looking forward to playing a productive role in that work.
So I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Eek. So we have no motion, notices of motion. Reports by councillor delegates. Do we have any councillors wanting to give a little bit of feedback, or just that you had great holidays? Is that it? Yeah, great. You've examined the waste and how they move around in cities around the world. Fantastic. We have no items of urgent business, but we do have a couple of two confidential items for tonight. So can I have a motion to close the meetings to consider these contractual confidential matters? Councillor Pearl, seconded by Councillor Brand. I put that motion. All those in favour? That is carried.